Welcome to the podcast. My name is John Stapleton. Today we are talking about God moving in small places, working with insignificant people, humble beginnings, um, really just being unimpressive in what he chooses. God is impressive. God is glorious. God is all those things. But often we tend to miss his glory because he shows up ordinary. He shows up small. He shows up without a big announcement. So I want to talk about Nazareth. We are still in chapter 2 of the book Jesus, adapted from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Before we get into it, just want to invite you, if you haven't picked up the book, I strongly encourage you to pick that up. You're going to love it. It's available in print for 24.99. It's available in ebook for 14.99. I'm about to put the audiobook out later this week, hopefully later this week, if not next week. But I am officially done recording the book, and I'm editing the last couple chapters, and that should be up hopefully soon. Um, Thank you for all that have read the book. Thank you for all that have told your friends about it, and it really does help me out. It's funny. I have some friends that are authors. I have some friends that have sold things before online, and they're like, you should really try to get your presence on Amazon. You should really just try to upload your things on there. And I wanted to do that for a bit. And technically, the ebook is available on Amazon, but the thing is with Amazon, they take about 40% of what you make. It's not really a great place for indie authors like myself. So, um, I'm working on. I have my website. It is live stapletonbooks.com. That's actually where you can go pick up the book, and I'm hoping pretty soon to have my bookstore, my online bookstore, up and running and live, so that you can buy the book directly from me and support me fully. So again, just want to thank you and let the rest of you know that what's available. What's available. So today we're talking about Nazareth, and the reason why we're talking about Nazareth is because Jesus was from Nazareth. We call Jesus Jesus of Nazareth. KB, one of my favorite authors, he wrote a book called Dangerous Jesus a few years ago, and he said, I'm basically paraphrasing what he said, but there's a quote in his book that says, we call Jesus Jesus of Nazareth, the place where nothing good comes from. Jesus will always be known as Jesus of the ghetto, right? Because that's the idea. Nothing good comes out of Nazareth. Nazareth was historically the place where foreign invaders they would cross through this nothing town called Nazareth on their way to pillage Jerusalem and other capitals. In fact, this is jumping a little ahead in the story, but when Jesus is getting his first disciples, he gets Nathaniel. Nathaniel hears about Jesus, and Nathaniel has some problems, some questions rather, and he's like, Nazareth. In fact, let me just read it to you. I have my Bible right here. There's no need to paraphrase when I don't have to. In John chapter 1, let me just read this. It starts at verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." And then he goes to meet Jesus. I I love the exchange because it's honest. Um, it's honest. I mean, just think of a nothing town. Um, no one's franchising it. Nobody is moving there. Nobody's interested in it. A lot of people don't even know that that's a place on the map because it is such a small, insignificant, dinky, podunk town. That's the idea. And this is the place where Jesus decides not to be born. He's born in Bethlehem, but it's the place where he decides to grow up. It's the place where his parents take him. It's the and I know really his disciples or sorry, his parents decided to live there. Jesus is submitting to their will, and in the divine will of God, he is known as the guy from Nazareth, right? So the idea that I want to stress today is that we often romanticize biblical places because they're far from us, right? Like I'm near Chicago, and um and there's some rough places in Chicago. Um that's more real to me than, let's say, Nazareth. I've never been to Nazareth. But that's what we do. Oh, that's a old biblical town. I'm pretty sure it was just nice and quiet and peaceful, and it wasn't that at all. It wasn't that at all. Here's how I introduce Nazareth in the book. Here's a quote. Nazareth was a place most people ignored. A handful of stone houses sat on the hillside, their walls matching the dusty color of the surrounding hills. Children ran after goats in the narrow alleys. Women carried jars to and from the well. Farmers worked hard trying to make the stubborn soil produce grain and olives. Nazareth showed no signs of greatness, nor did it suggest heaven's focus would be there. Yet God is not impressed by cities. He tends to choose unnoticed places where hearts are calm enough to hear his voice. In one such humble home lived a young woman named Mary. And so that's essentially what Nazareth was like. Very small, had only a few hundred people. Archaeology suggests that the modern settlement was built along the slopes of Lower Galilee. So think limestone homes. Actually, my first home had a limestone base. So think, damp rock, wet, kind of moldy, kind of smelling. Um, Storage caves, cisterns, terraces for farming, dirt pathways instead of paved roads. Um, this is this is where Jesus grew up. This is the very opposite of Jerusalem, which is very it had no marble, it had no political buildings, right? There was no temple, there was no Antonia fortress, there was no house of the high priest, none of that. Um, Most farmers and laborers trying to survive. This is what um, this is this is what this is what happened. This is what happened. Um, and so economically, they were modest. They had um, they had family businesses that traded grain, olives. People worked in vineyards, and they were shepherding small livestock, sheep, goats, things like that. Most families lived near substance, sub subsistence subsistence level. Um, Bad weather could devastate a year of of food supply. Rome taxed heavily through local systems, and life was physically demanding. So just think, everyone's blue collar, everybody's being taxed up the wazoo. You're barely making it as it is. You have a humble home. You have little food. You live off the land, and you work with your hands. That's what life was like in Nazareth. And so, because of all these factors, if you're from Galilee, if you're from Nazareth, if you're from one of these small towns, you were often looked down upon because, think of the type of people that would live there. It's not educated people. It's people that failed rabbi school. Like if you were, so in that day, and I'm not saying it's right, but let me just tell you, in that day, girls didn't go to school, boys did, and they were given an opportunity to learn Torah and become a Bible teacher, maybe a Pharisee one day. And the boys that were too dumb, that were dumb enough to not pass, the boys that were just, they couldn't memorize the verses, they didn't get the theology, they couldn't explain it, they couldn't articulate they couldn't talk in an articulate way. They flunked rabbi school. They couldn't find a rabbi to find, and so they went home and picked up the family business. So it's really interesting if you fast forward in the story of Jesus. His disciples are all people that flunked school. They're fishermen. They're one's a tax collector. Um, uh, you know, Judas is the one city boy. I'm not exactly sure what he did. I think it's interesting that the chosen decided to paint him like a businessman. That was a little too close to home there, but um, he he picks people that don't have clerical jobs. He picks people that don't have impressive jobs. We really don't know what most of these guys did, but one thing is for sure: they weren't part of the priesthood or any of these religious parties that I talked about a few days ago. He wasn't a Herodian. They weren't Pharisees. They weren't Sadducees. They weren't. They probably weren't Essenes. And we did have one zealot. Let me correct myself. We did have one zealot, Simon the Zealot. But of course, he's not a zealot when he's following Jesus. Um, and so there's a lot of tension between Judea and Galilee. It's interesting even today. I mean, uh, things have not changed. We judge People get judged based off of where they're from. Like growing up, I grew up in Section 8 housing. I was judged a lot for that. Um, you know, growing up, driving around. So I live in Plainfield now. I live in a house. I'm a homeowner, second time homeowner. Um, there are still times where that's a bit surreal for me. But here's one thing. Um, we like I when I'm driving, I still look at neighborhoods and oh, that neighborhood has an HOA. That neighborhood doesn't have an HOA. This one's more meticulous than that one. This one's more put together than that one. Oh, these type of people tend to live here. Just I like to observe a lot of things, and that is one thing that has not changed about humanity. We are still. I mean, this is actually turning into a kind of a different podcast here, but like if you read like the warmth of other suns, you read about the Great Migration, you read about how people in America dispersed and how our cities came together. It's kind of the same idea here, right? Where power is often concentrated in one area. So biblically, this would be Jerusalem, Judea area, and then the less educated people that are living off the land and aren't as learned, aren't as read, are up in the north. They're near Galilee. They're in Nazareth. They're in places like that. And so, um, why does God begin here? We know what Nazareth is. Why does God begin here? Because let's consider where he could have began. He could have began in Rome. He could have began in Alexandria. He could have began in Athens. He could have began in Jerusalem. That's the capital of God's people, of all places. But instead, here's what Nazareth represents. It represents peasants, laborers, women, and fishermen. It represents people that are marginalized and don't have a voice and are often overlooked. Jesus came first for people like that. And this is what the incarnation is all about: how God, the glorious God, enters into the ordinary life, into our ordinary human experience fully. Fully. Because let me tell you something: if he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, if he was born somewhere nice, we could say, what, Jesus is not for everybody. Jesus is for the rich people. I mean, even today, there's still a lot of people that look like me that will say, "Well, Christianity is the white man's religion," and what they're saying is, Christianity hasn't done anything for us. But that's not true. First off, Jesus was Middle Eastern. I like the black people don't have him, and the white people don't have him. He's Middle Eastern, and when he walked this earth, he was poor. In your next Bible study, if you want to stump your friends, you just ask them the question: was Jesus rich or poor? The answer is yes. In heaven, he's rich. Paul writes in Second Corinthians 9, he was rich, but though he was rich, he became poor for our sakes, that through him we might become rich through his poverty. So Jesus in heaven is rich. He was always rich. He's rich right now. When Jesus walked the earth for 33 years, Jesus was poor. And he does this so that he can relate to all people. in the Gospels, you see everybody drifting, coming to him, and for those that don't, like there's a scene where a rich man wants to get to Jesus, and Jesus says, um, "It's with difficulty that a rich man enters the kingdom of heaven. If you want to be perfect, go sell everything that you have, and then come follow me, and you'll have treasure in heaven." And the man can't do it because he is so tied to his possessions. And so Jesus is for everybody. He's for the rich and the poor. Often what we see is for the rich, their money, they love money more than they love God. In fact, in Luke chapter 18, this was the critique of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were lovers of money rather than lovers of God. And so this is why Jesus is so unassuming when he shows up on the scene. There are several movies of Jesus that they're trying to capture two components of who he is. So let's get a little nerdy for a moment. Jesus has two natures. He is fully man and he is fully God. And when he is being portrayed on the screen, there is often a drift to portray him as fully God. So he walks around like he just stepped out of a nuclear transplant. He walks around glowing. He walks around ethereal, like he's got a halo around his head, like he's not from this earth. And Jesus didn't walk around like that. That's not true. On the other hand, Jesus is fully man. And so it's important to see him laughing and joking with his friends and crying and showing compassion. The default emotion of Jesus in the Bible, in the gospel, is compassion. I believe Jesus had a sense of humor. It's in there. I don't get too far into the book because that wasn't my goal. But a case could be made for the humor of Christ. One day I might want to write a book like that, The Humor of God or something like that. It's in there, and we need to see him struggle in the Garden of Gethsemane. We need to see him we need to see him rejoice when demons are cast out, and he sends the 70, and the 70 come back, and they're like, hey, even the demons rejoice, or even the demons flee at the mention of your name. We need to see all facets of Jesus' emotional life, and at the same time, here's the problem. If we focus on his godness only, or we focus on his humanity only, but we don't put those things together, what we have is a truncated version of Jesus that only works for some people, but not everybody. We need to, when we're telling the story, we need to capture all sides of who he was, because Jesus, many people were drawn to Jesus, and many people were repulsed by Jesus. And the reason why is because Jesus is winsome, but he cannot be put in anybody's box. He cannot be put in anybody's box. And so yeah, I want to get back here. So God often works quietly before he works publicly. This is why Jesus lived in obscurity for for the first 30 years. It's interesting if we think about, like, okay, so Jesus was born, and then Matthew shows us when he's like 2 years old, the Magi come and visit him. And then there's another spot in Luke's gospel where he's 12 and he gets lost in the temple. He stays behind. And then after that, we don't see him again until he's about 30 years old. And what did he do between 12 and 30? Some people say that he went to Egypt or Alexandria and practiced magic. I don't think that happened. Um, you know, we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. We don't know what he was doing between those, and that's kind of the point, right? He was probably a carpenter. His dad probably died sometime in that time period. But Jesus had a normal, ordinary life with five other siblings, or six, a few handful of other siblings. Um, and then Jesus started doing miracles, which is when you look at Mark chapter 3, his family come to get him. They think he's lost his mind. They think it's crazy. And because they grew up with him, and he's familiar, and now he's saying that he's God. This is discombobulating. So they come to get him, put him in a straight bed, put him in a straight jacket, have him committed, have him institutionalized, and someone walks up to him and they say, "Hey, Jesus, your mother and brother are here to see you." And they say, Jesus says, "Who is my mother and who are my brother?" And then he points to his disciples and those around him. He said, "These are my mother and sister and brother. Whoever does the will of God is my mother and sister and brother." I just love that. God reminded me of that verse on Mother's Day, and it's like it is so cool that Jesus just reframes what that is. And speaking of Jesus' mother, Mary in historical context, she's like a teenager. She's young, she's illiterate. Um, she went to synagogue and heard the scripture in synagogue, and that's how she would commit that to memory. In fact, she breaks out in song in Luke chapter 1, and you can see how much of the scriptures is just ruminating in her heart. Very humble, very unnoticeable. And so here's what I want to leave with. History reminds us that Christianity did not begin as a movement positioned for worldly success. Um, I think I think often, you know, we look at metrics and numbers. I mean, I'm a YouTuber. I look at some of the stuff. I'm a business owner. I look at this stuff. It's very easy to put a number on success, and God does things in such an odd, backwards way to remind us that success actually happens when we're obedient to His will. Right? Money is not forever. Fame is not forever. Success, however you're defining it, it's not forever. And in the end, we just have our relationship with God. In the end, we just have what God is doing. In the end, history is all about what is God doing from beginning to end. Um, I often say, we're watching a 3-hour movie and our life is like 20 seconds of that movie. We have no idea what's happening. And we have to trust the one that is, who can see the beginning and the end. So that's what I have today. Don't despise your small beginnings. You may be from a Nazareth, but that doesn't mean that you are not, that God can't do great things through you. I'm going to leave you with that. And until next time, God bless you. Remember to visit stapletonbooks.com to pick up a copy of the book. God bless.